So this might look familiar to people. This is a theme that I talked about at the Lily Adult Weekend, and it might not be familiar to everyone. And those who have seen this sort of theme before, I'm going to be talking about things in a very different way, so it's not repetition. But it's part of the way that I like to think about or talk about my experience of working with people affected by mitochondrial disease. And as part of doing that, um, the presentation comes with essentially a bit of an introduction and a warning. So the introduction is, and I would name this very early on, is that I don't have personal experience of mitochondrial disease. I haven't been affected as a family member, or I don't live with mitochondrial disease. So much of what I talk about is based on my experience as a neuropsychologist, my experience of working with families and people who are affected, and also the blessing of people who have read this and heard this and have said that they found it helpful, or that it's connected with them, or that it's gone some way to explaining their experience. But it still comes with the warning that I don't truly know what it's like to kind of live with mitochondrial disease. So part of what I'm sharing here is, it's advice based on an outsider's view. And again, like I've said, people have found this helpful, so hopefully it connects with you as well. If it doesn't, let me know, and I can change it, amend it, and go from there. The other thing is that I use an example, a way of understanding people's experience with an analogy or a theme. And the reason I do that is I hope to connect with as many people who have different experiences of living with a rare condition as possible. And that's particularly in something like mitochondrial disease, because everyone's experience is really unique and different. So if I were to do a presentation and talk about all of those examples, we'd be here all night, weekend, week, month, and probably year, to be honest, and you certainly wouldn't want that. So again, please pardon my hopeful attempt at trying to connect an experience with an example. It isn't intended to reduce people's experience of the condition. Okay. So essentially what I'm going to be talking about is this idea of the sort of things that turn up and are difficult when living with a rare disease or living with mitochondrial disease. And for many people who live with mitochondrial disease, it's fair to say that things are tough, things are really difficult, and a lot of things turn up that cause commonly distress. So things that are hard, difficult, or cause emotions like anxiety, depression, sadness, pain, stress. The list goes on, really. And when we think about mitochondrial disease, I always ask this question: what turns up? And I do that again because I'm not someone who lives with mitochondrial disease. So it's almost a way of, even the title mitochondrial disease, what sort of things, do you think about when you or someone you care about lives with mito? What turns up? What sort of thoughts turn up? Feelings? What type of sensations? And really commonly, the things I hear, particularly around thoughts, is fear, scared, worried, concerned, unsure, don't know, don't understand. Feelings of sadness, regret, worry, anger, frustration. And in terms of sensations, then, they're often linked to those emotions. So when we're deeply worried about something, we might feel a pit in our stomach, a lump in our throat, a tension in our shoulders. Often those things are all linked. And it's really difficult to get feedback from you all on a video call like this. But hopefully, I'm saying things that potentially connect or that you're familiar with. So these are the things that turn up when we experience concerns or think about mitochondrial disease. And a good way of thinking about these typical thoughts, feelings, sensations is to think of it like a monster. If this feeling or thought was a monster, what would it look like? Would it be big, small, gentle, fluffy? Would it have fangs? Would it be enormous? Would it have claws? Would it, if anyone knows those plants that are like glue that stick to you on a summer's walk or when you're outside, do they stick to you and you just can't seem to shake them no matter how much you pull? What do they sound like? Do they have a deep voice, a terrifying voice, a loud voice? what sort of things might they say to you? So if it's anxiety, does it whisper to you in the middle of the night and say, what if, what if I have the disease? What if my loved one is poorly next week? What if they don't make it? Worrying, awful thoughts like that. What would they say to you? So again, some of the examples I've thought. And the reason I frame it like this is because each of us will have our own experience of that monster, its own form, and particular hurtful things that it says to us in the context of living with a rare disease. So again, with lots of people that I work with, whether it's family members or parents, often it is worries about the future and uncertainty. So, if it's an uncertain monster, it's usually shrouded in darkness and it wraps itself around us and makes us feel like we're choking because we just don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to respond to it or get rid of it. It just feels like it's always there. And one of the things that I really try to connect with in my work is thinking about, for each person I work with, what truly matters to them. What's their compass in life? Is it to be a great mum, to be the best friend they can be, to be a protector, to be someone who's financially reliable? It's different for everybody. For some people, it's even things like being a really good Christian or following my faith correctly. It's the things that guide you through life that are your consistency. And often the common things that come up are, to be a really good brother, a really good friend, a really good mum, a really good dad, to look after the people I care for, those kinds of things. And one of the things we know is that distress or pain, or particularly emotional pain like anxiety, depression, stress, they're what I say two sides of the same coin. So where we care the most, we hurt the most. So if we think of a rare disease like mitochondrial disease, it's usually a threat to something that's very important to us, whether it's to ourselves if we live with the condition or disease, or whether it's about somebody we care for. And the reason it hurts so much is often because it's it's in conflict with the stuff that matters to us. So lots of parents I work with, it's, my job as a parent is to look after and care and protect my child. That's my job. That's the thing that I'm on this earth to do. And mitochondrial disease is, it's a threat to that. It attacks that. And that's why I feel distress. And often the distress they experience is so deep and difficult, they're not really sure how they're going to get out of it. It's just so hard. And really, part of the work that I like to do, or the advice I like to give, is one of the best ways of potentially overcoming or starting to overcome the things that distress us in the context of mitochondrial disease is truly getting to know our own monsters. As someone who works with people affected by mitochondrial disease, I've heard about lots of different monsters, and there's definitely some themes, but it's absolutely different for everybody. Whether that's the things it says, whether that's its shape and size, or the time it turns up and affects us, it truly is different for everyone. In hearing those stories, there are absolutely themes that connect the monsters. They're usually very frightening, usually intercept lots of different parts of life, and usually are associated with deep sadness and hurt. And if I were to ask you to think about your monsters on this webinar, if you could think about what they look like right now, the times they turn up most commonly for you, and what happens when they turn up. And almost just take a minute, half a minute, just to really think about at the moment, if your emotions were a monster related to mitochondrial disease, what would they look like? When do they turn up? And what happens when they turn up for you? And I'm going to kind of hold a bit of a pause there just to give you some time to think about that. You might even find now that as you're beginning to think about them and they kind of take shape and form, that you begin to feel those emotions or think a bit more deeply about what it feels like, or you're just a bit more aware of their presence, and that's really common. You could have a real deep sense of what they look like and what they feel like, and it could be, it could bother you, essentially. I'm going to talk about what to do when those emotions or monsters turn up. For lots of you on this call, you could have lots of monsters. And the example we always give is this idea of a sort of bus. If you were the driver of a bus and it was filled with these unhelpful monsters, your destination is to the most important part in your life. So to get from the place you are now to the end of the road. And the type of monsters you might have are, the pain monsters. Different monsters on your bus are kind of shouting things at you and trying to distract you from your journey. And you can imagine how that might feel then to be a driver, have this sort of barrage of negative comments or difficult comments or worry. It seems plausible that you probably wouldn't be concentrating very much on the journey, or it'd be difficult to concentrate on the journey. And ultimately, it can be really hard living with monsters. And that's what I try and connect with when I talk to people about how to cope with sort of difficult emotions. Is it is really hard. It's so difficult that I couldn't imagine. And I've certainly heard from people when they've described their monsters. I think it helps me to understand, to sort of imagine what it must feel like to have this character or this awful, foreboding, terrifying thing. They're sort of terrifying you. But I guess I'm not just here to say the obvious. My goal is to hopefully give you some advice or some thoughts about what we might be able to do. One of the therapies that I talk a lot about and I've found to be most helpful for people living with a rare disease like mito is this thing called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT for short. And it's called ACT on purpose because it's about what we do. It's what we do when these monsters turn up, when they're really difficult and they're hanging around us and they're hooked to our neck. It's obviously not comparable at all, but one of my monsters right now is my imposter syndrome monster telling me that I'm probably doing a really average job of telling you all about this. And it's doing its best to try and distract me from giving a good presentation. And ultimately, one of the ways that this way of sort of doing therapy or doing something, one of the ways it tells us that can be helpful is essentially to connect with the here and now. So even me telling you all that I'm a bit nervous, that I've got imposter syndrome, and that my unhelpful monster is telling me that you're really rubbish at this, Ben. People probably won't like what you're talking about. It's really boring. Get on with it. Those kind of thoughts. Being present of what that monster's giving me helps me know then how I might react to it or deal with it. It then tells us that it could be helpful to notice when the monster turns up. So right now I'm noticing that when I give a presentation, that's when that monster turns up for me. For lots of people, they begin to notice things, well, with mito, they begin to notice that it turns up, for example, when they get a letter from a hospital, when it arrives on the desk, on the floor of your house in that brown envelope with the NHS logo, their monster turns up. It's fear or concern or worry or stress. That can be sort of common monsters that turn up. Or it could be the impending review with a consultant where they're going to talk about diagnosis or lack of diagnosis or uncertainty around diagnosis or predictions about the future. It could be when we're just spending time with a loved one when they're struggling with a rare disease like mito, and we feel like we don't know what to do and we feel guilty. We don't know how to help or what might be helpful. So again, it's just noticing what turns up, what the monster looks like, and what it does when it turns up. And in those moments, this particular approach says that it's important to focus on behavior that's important to you, that is in service of the things that are important to you the most. So, right now, if I was applying this to my experience, I'm noticing that my imposter monster is there telling me I'm doing an average job, maybe below average. I'm noticing that it's trying to distract me from giving a good presentation that feels genuine, authentic, and that I'm connecting with you all. And I'm trying really hard to focus on doing a good job. I'm making sure that my speech is slow and considered, that I'm not rushing, even though my monster's telling me to just get on with it. And maybe as well, I'm open to the fact that I'm going to get some feedback from this, and that I'm open to the fact that this might not be good or it might be great, that actually getting that feedback is helpful. If we look at another example of the NHS letter sort of arriving on our doorstep, in that moment, we might connect with the here and now and say, gosh, I feel frightened to open that letter. I'm noticing my monster's saying, it's the worst news, it's terrifying. Don't open it. It's saying, open it right now. It's going to show just how horrible things are. And in that moment, it might be important to connect with what is important to you, whether it's you're opening that letter for a loved one or you're opening a letter for yourself and it's related to your own health condition. It's saying, what is important to me? It's important to me to kind of face this rare disease head on, to be brave, to, sort of face whatever comes. And I'm doing that because it's important to me that I'm, consistent. I want to be sure to others that I'm brave and that I can do this. Or it could be that you get the envelope and take it to a loved one and saying, can we open this together? Because I'm here to support you and I care about you. And I know this might be scary for you. And it's really showing the monster that you're not necessarily frightened of them. You're aware they're there, but you're sort of taking them with you. Now, that's a really sort of difficult, abstract idea to get your head around. And it also doesn't give you a very specific thing to do. Because of my imposter syndrome monster, I need some feedback now about whether that makes sense. And the only way I can get that is if I'd like either a thumbs up, that makes sense, a middle thumb, as in, I don't know really what you're talking about, but it sort of makes sense, or a thumbs down. What is this guy going on about? Can anyone give me any idea of how they're feeling? See a couple of thumbs up, a few thumbs up. Thank you. Brilliant. I really appreciate that. And like TripAdvisor reviews, I'm focusing on the 5-star ones, but the minute I get one star one, it just undoes all of the 5-star reviews, as we often do when we look at TripAdvisor. Okay, I'm glad that makes sense. And ultimately, when we experience a group of monsters, they really do get in the way of being able to live our values. So it's like, I'd really like to be a good mum, but I'm so terrified of the idea of not having this person in my life, of losing them, that I almost can't, I can't talk about mito with them because it's too distressing. Or I really want to talk to this person about mito. I want to talk about my mito, but I can't because I don't want to upset the person that I care for. That would be a good example of how these monsters get in the way of values. And the value there would be to connect with my family, to be present with my family, to communicate with my family, to show that they're important to me. And if we think of a guilt monster, often the most tricky monster, if I'm being completely honest, it's the one that comes up most commonly in my work with people who are affected by mito for a variety of reasons. And the thing with guilt is it's got this habit of being able to get its fingers between your ribs and really hold on and stick there. And when the monster tells me, say, I'm a bad mum, a poor friend, that I haven't done enough to care, it's common that people say they freeze and they do things that they wouldn't typically want to do. That I suppose in psychology speak, we might talk as being sort of maladaptive. So it could be when I feel the guilt monster because I think I'm not doing enough. I drink too much. I eat too much. I gamble. I take drugs. I avoid talking about a topic. I get angry with my friends. I neglect work. I sleep too much. I pick my eyebrows hair and pull them out. It can be a variety of things, but it's often in response to the feeling of guilt. When that monster's there, this is what I do. It pulls me away from what's important to me. And one of the really difficult things about that is when we do things that aren't consistent with what's important to us, it makes us feel even worse. So, I feel guilty for not doing this. So then what I've done is I've shouted at my family members, I've shouted at my son or daughter, and I feel even worse now. And I don't know what to do. I feel stuck. And ultimately, the point I'm making is the monsters get in the way of constantly doing what's important to us, what matters to us most. And the advice I'm trying to give here is when you figure out what your monster is, if you can describe it, whether or not you can pin an emotion to it, is trying to think how currently that monster is getting in the way of you living a life that you would want to live. That monster could be mito itself. It could be that, I'd love to spend more time with my friends, but I get so tired. I just can't face hanging out with my friends that much. It could be, concerns about starting a family, about not starting a family. But it's these, again, as I said earlier, pain and values are two sides of the same coin. So where we care the most, we tend to hurt the most. And I hope that makes sense, everyone. And the more we're bothered by these monsters, the more we turn away from what matters to us. And ultimately, in my view, as a clinical psychologist, someone who helps people who struggle with emotions, this is what leads to really difficult emotions like depression or anxiety, sometimes post-traumatic stress disorder, or the type of difficulties that we hear about commonly that people really, really struggle with. And those clinical conditions affect how people live, what they do, and their hope and optimism for the future. So, my advice here is what happens if, instead of doing all the things we can do to escape someone like Barry the monster, the guilt monster, we let him in, we take him with us, and we might share that with others. So, for example, by me sharing with you all that my imposter syndrome monster is right here next to me, I'm more able to kind of open up with you all, name that, and focus on what's important to me. Sometimes our monsters are kind of really stuck to our face and we just can't move because of them. But just sort of gently, if we can pull them alongside us and say, okay, I'm feeling sadness, I'm feeling worry, but who or what matters to me in this moment? A good example of that might be, again, the letter arrives on the doorstep. I'm feeling intense worry about what's in that envelope, but I need to face this because it's important to me to be brave, to be consistent with the person that I want to be, to show that to my family that they're important to me. And I'm going to open it and face that fear or sort of bring this fear with me. I suppose the common phrase we might say is sort of feel the fear and do it anyway. But again, that's sort of easy for me to say, right? And if we know our monsters and how they work, we know how they can hook us. So we know the times that they get hold of us and pull us. We know the times that if guilt is present, how we might struggle and what things happen. So a good example is whenever I go for a hospital appointment, I notice that I'm just so distracted by how scary it feels. I get really irritable with the people that are important to me. So when we know that for a future appointment, we might have to do some extra work to think about ways of kind of naming it that with our family. So, if your family member's called Steve, you might say, Steve, this is a hospital appointment for me. I get really overwhelmed. What I really need you to do is just kind of just reassure me, let me listen to the music when I need it. If I've got some headphones and just need to relax, or I need you to hold my hand because this is how I cope with the monster when it turns up. But sort of directing people, and hopefully that will help. And ultimately, it's understanding how these monsters pull us away from actually what matters to us. One of the really difficult topics that comes up for lots of people I support is grief and loss. And how do I move on or cope with or think about coping with someone I've lost or something I've lost? Loss doesn't always have to be losing a person. It could be a change to our physical function, our cognitive function, an ability that's important to us, like speaking or walking. And when we're facing those difficulties, how has that pulled us away from what matters to us? What's super important, and how do we then move towards it by speaking to people in a way that communicates them what might be important in that moment? And the idea is the more consistently we live with our values, the stuff that matters most to us, the things that truly matter in our heart, the more these monsters tend to bother us a little bit less. Their voices are a little quieter. Typically, for people living with mito, they don't always go away. We just find that they're a little bit quieter. So, a good example here might be I notice that when I'm thinking about an upcoming appointment, I get really short with my partner, or get really short with my kids because worry is present. So I'm going to make an active attempt to show them how much I love them. I'm going to make sure I tell them all the time, even if that's saying sometimes that I'm really frightened. And what we find is in those moments, by pushing the monster slightly to one side, by doing something that's important to us, we tend to feel better. That's what the evidence tells us. But again, it's very easy for me to say. What I would say is when I've done some of this work with people who live with mito, they have said that it does help. The goal isn't to feel happier necessarily, it's to be more consistent with the person you want to be, the thing that's important to you. But there's no doubt about it, particularly in the context of mitochondrial disease, it can be really, really hard, and it can be really, really hard to know what to do. And if we think about how you feel right now, so as I've been talking here, if I could ask you to reflect on right now, what's most important to you in this moment? And just take, again, 30 seconds, 45 seconds to really think right now, tonight. It's the Tuesday, the 18th of March. Tomorrow isn't guaranteed, but right now, what's the most important thing to me in the world? You might find that it just sort of centers you on what is actually important. And typically, the type of things that come up for people might be family, it could be peace, it could be being free from pain, it could be lots of different things. But the point I always make when I kind of talk about this theme is that it's different for everybody. Just as everyone's experience of mito is different, everyone's values are slightly different. And when you begin to notice the type of sort of characters that turn up the monsters, it's just trying to notice with kindness and compassion and not judge the monsters that you have. People, one of the most difficult things that people often talk to me about and share in confidence, and that's why I feel safe to share it here, is emotions like relief when they maybe do lose a loved one, that they're then free from sort of pain and uncertainty and suffering, and they can often feel guilt in response to that thought. Again, it's just noticing your experience, noticing that the things that come up for you with that genuine kindness and compassion, that there are no rules when it comes to the sort of emotions, thoughts, and sensations that turn up when you're kind of thinking about mitochondrial disease, whether you're affected or somebody else is affected, that everything is valid. that it's often just a response to the pain you might have felt and the things that feel difficult at that time. But for many, sometimes monsters are just too powerful. And it doesn't matter how much you welcome them in or tussle with them or try and figure them out, it's all just a bit overwhelming. And that's absolutely okay. It isn't a sign you're weak or aren't resilient enough. Sometimes we need help to figure out our monsters, either because they're too big or too unwieldy or there's too many of them, and that's very normal. And as I've said, because they're terrifying, because they're difficult to figure out, or for some people, because they've lost hope or energy. And that's why it's obviously very important for me to say that if that is the case, to seek professional help and support. Services like the Lilly Foundation offer fantastic support for people who might be struggling with their mental health or struggling with mitochondrial disease. And I feel quite proud to support the charity with that. But there's also lots of different options. For some people, their monsters are so terrifying that it almost affects their complete experience of the world, and they might need the support of something like a psychiatrist or medication. Sometimes that's because the monsters tinker about with chemicals in the brain and make it really hard for people to make sense of the world. And again, that's where seeking appropriate professional support can be really, really helpful. If you're unsure, sometimes it's just about getting guidance from your GP as well. Some people might need some support from, say, medication in order to then be able to figure out their monsters. Antidepressants, for example, if people are struggling with depression, it clouds your thinking so much that you just can't even begin to reason or think through the monsters. So therefore, an antidepressant might help to lift that cloud enough for you to begin to then engage with either treatment or to think through things. And that can be really important to people. Again, everyone's experience is different. Some people have had a really tough time on antidepressants or with medication, and some people have found it quite helpful. Try not to judge your experience based on the experience of others, would be my advice. They're the main themes that I wanted to talk about in quite a broad way. And my goal really was to ask if you had any questions that might help me explain my thinking a little bit more. But mainly, I just want to say a huge thank you. You've given up some of your time to hear me speak about this, particularly when I don't have lived experience. And I really appreciate that. And I'd also really welcome any feedback at all, even if this made no sense. If it made complete sense, if you had more questions, that'd be really helpful. So thank you everyone for listening.